supposed to have over 100 people that have signed up for this event. So I want to be sure I start on time, but I also be a little bit flexible and give people a few extra minutes where we can in order to join. Because again, it's such a big group that's going to be participating. Let's see if I can change my background for some reason. Here we go. Ah, much better. Looks like we have a lot of familiar names that have already joined, and people are joining as we go. So for those of you that have been on webinars that we've done before, this will be hopefully just some review for you as we go through the housekeeping part. For other people who haven't been on before, haven't been on recently, we'll go into some more details about how you can access the recording and some of the information that we're going to present. So a few more people joining here. If you have a moment, somebody can just respond in the chat box that you can hear me, you can see my screen. It should be the welcome to the event South America regulatory updates screen or slide, I should say. That'd be helpful. Okay, good. Thank you. Give it one more minute and go ahead and get started. People are still filtering in from all different geographies. All right, and you should be able to see the slide presentation there as well. Okay. See, we have some people from India chatting in. Very good. Glad that you were able to make it. I know I have an Indian client right now that I've been working with, and it's later in the evening, your time, I believe. Here it's in Atlanta, Georgia, United States. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, but I think it's almost going toward evening or time for your evening meal in India right now. All right, so people are still continuing to join, but I'll go ahead and get started because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So as we talked about in the lead up to the meeting through some emails and through some social media postings, we're going to be giving a South America regulatory updates perspective today in our presentation. So for those of you, as I alluded to earlier, who maybe haven't been on any of these webinars before, or maybe not in some time, just some quick review. If you don't mind, please mute your microphone. That'd be very helpful so we don't have any background noise of people having their coffee or tea or walking into meetings, whatever it might be. Those of you, some of you already responded in the chat area of this webinar, and you can continue to do so there. You can submit those comments or questions in real time. I can't promise I will get to them all because they have a bit of heavy material to go through today. But if I don't, I save those chats and I will respond to you directly by email. So if you forget something or there's not enough time to get to your question, don't worry. We certainly will be able to answer it. The third point, again, for people that are maybe new to this, I want to stress, because especially in this presentation, you'll see it. There's a lot of data. There have been a lot of changes or proposed changes in South America concerning chemical and consumer products regulations, especially with Brazil. So you're going to see a lot of information. And because we only have an hour, I necessarily need to speak somewhat quickly to go through it all. So if you don't understand something at the time, or I don't give enough detail for what you want, don't worry. What I do is I make sure all the details are in the slides so you can go back at your leisure and go through and review the materials that maybe I didn't get to or I went through too quickly. And then in that same answer, number 4, those of you who haven't participated or even just need a quick refresher, every webinar that we do is recorded. This is being recorded right now. And usually about 30 minutes or 1 hour after we complete the webinar, it's posted to our YouTube page. That's the link there. That link should be active in the slides that hopefully all of you received about an hour ago this morning. If for some reason it's not, or you forget in the future, you don't have it to hand or whatever, you see the screen snip there from our company page, which is m4globalconsultingllc.com. And if you look all the way to the right, there's a green button that says Contact Us. And right to the left of that button, you'll see the YouTube video icon. You click that, that'll take you to our YouTube page. And we have all of ours. Chemical regulations in Israel, previous ones we've done on South America, one we're going to be putting up shortly about chemical regulations in Egypt, for example. So you can always look at them right there, and there's obviously no charge. You can pull them up at your convenience. So for those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet before, and it looks like there's quite a lot of repeat people, so hopefully I'm doing something right with these webinars. M4 Global Consulting was founded in 2009. By my background, I have over 25, now it's probably closer to 27 years in global chemical and consumer product companies. So AkzoNobel, Kimberly-Clark, Procter & Gamble, Kemira. I see Andrea is on here. Good morning to you, Andrea. in manager and director roles. So one of the things that I think we bring to the table, our firm, especially I through the firm, bring to the table is we know the regulations in these countries that we're going to be talking about and have talked about in the past. But I think where we're unique is coming from that 25 plus years in industry, we have the ability to sit down with the various groups in your organization and talk from a business standpoint with them, as well as educating them on what the regulations might be. So over my career, I've spent many meetings with supply chain, research and development people, marketing, finance people, and we are able to have those conversations with those people so we understand what the business needs are, not just saying, here's the regulation you need to follow, good luck with it. If your supply chain person says, well, how do I source sustainable materials, or how do I source something that's compliant for this biocide product that we're going to make, we can have those conversations very technically and very direct. I've also had the opportunity to publish some journal articles and a couple of books on chemical regulations. And I've had the chance also globally to speak on Latin America and South American regulations as well. So one of the reasons, again, if you're not familiar, you need a refresher, why us? Why not some other company? Well, the first one I talked to you about already is we have that business technical knowledge. We've met with the decision makers, both in my career and also as a consultant, to have those deep conversations that we need to have. You can see some of the expertise we have here in Latin America. This is certainly not all of them. These are some of the ones that we're particularly proud of. Probably the most one is right when COVID-19 started in spring of 2020. We were able to get a disinfectant product registered with the Mexican authorities that had COVID claims. And I don't recall if it wasn't the first to have those claims in Mexico, it was the second or third. It was one of the very first to have those claims in place. A lot of memos we do for Egypt and FDA devices, for example, in the UAE, things like that. So we have this broad experience. We can do chemicals, we can do consumer products. And then another plug real quick before we start with the website. We operate in 66 countries, as you see here. And what you can do on our website is you go there and it talks about, there's a section on there that talks about our services. You click on there and what you will see is a sortable graphic. It used to be an Excel spreadsheet. Now we had some people clean it up and it looks a lot better. It's sortable by product category and also by country. So if you want to see, for example, if we do work in the Cayman Islands, you can go and sort by just Cayman Islands and you will see, do we do biocides? Do we do pesticides? Do we do consumer products? It's a very quick matrix to find out if we can meet your needs in these areas. And I like to think that we can in most cases. So going through the agenda, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at the slides. If you haven't, don't worry. That was one of the feedback I got earlier this year was people would like the slides in advance to prepare questions. Absolutely fine. Was happy to do that. We're going to look at 5 countries today, and you're probably looking at the agenda right now saying, well, Trinidad and Tobago aren't really in South America. And that's true. They're Caribbean, but for purposes of this, and because they have a regulation that just recently came out about cleaning and disinfecting products, I said, well, they're sort of in the region. They're close enough. Let's include them just because they have something to talk about right now. So that's the reason for that. So if we start with Guatemala, and again, people are coming in from all different backgrounds. This may be the first time you've heard anything about South America regulations. One of the things in South America, there's a couple ways that they manage regulations, and one of them is through what are called technical standards. And you see this in other countries as well. You see it also in Saudi Arabia and Israel and places in the Middle East. Technical standards are prepared by third parties because, simply put, the government says, we don't have the expertise in our government authority to write the regulations that we need to write. We don't have people that know, for example, biocide regulations or consumer product regulations, or maybe even technical chemistry when you look at banned lists and so on. So they sub that out to a third party. For example, in Saudi Arabia, it's called the Saudi Arabian Standards Authority, SASA, and they do that as a contract work to create these standards. So I say that to say what happened in Guatemala here is they did that exact thing with their technical standard 84-2021. And if you're not familiar with how regulations work, again, in South America, this means in the regulation, it was the 84th, number 84 technical standard that came out in 2021. That doesn't mean they're all related to chemicals. It just means when you list them all together, this was the 84th one that they produced. So you see the language here. I always put the Spanish translation. So if you're looking for it in the native language, you can find it. But you see it's also called Technical Standard 84-2021, Sanitary Registration of Repellent Products for External Use in Humans and Spatial Repellent Products. That's a mouthful. We'll go into that in a second so you can see how it applies. And the competent authority I'm always going to give you, in this case, it's the Ministry of Public Health and Social Welfare. So not only do you have the title of the language, the title of the regulation or standard in the native language, but you also will have who the competent authority is, who administers it, who's responsible for it, who would you have a discussion with about that in the country. So I try to provide that guidance to make it a little bit easier for everyone. This is interesting because I had a lot of questions, not in Guatemala, but elsewhere, about how do companies or countries in South America regulate repellent products? So mosquito spray, or in the United States, we say bug spray, as a big category, but a spray product for external use. And make sure that's clear here. We're only talking about external use because generally speaking, you don't have an internal use of a repellent product. There's a lot of issues with that, but so external use in humans, or I should say on humans, that's actually a typo. Repellent products for external use on humans, whether natural or synthetic. Questions I get all the time. Well, if I want to use citronella oil and some other things as a natural repellent in South America, do I still need to go through the registration process? Depending on the country, maybe. But here you see in Guatemala, whether it's natural or synthetic, you have to go through the registration for products in these categories. And just really quickly, when you see the term sanitary registration in South America, that's essentially what we would call in the United States, or maybe in Europe, a pesticide registration, sometimes a biocide registration, depending on what it is for, but that's what they mean by sanitary. They don't necessarily mean have a sanitizing claim. It means sanitary registration in that aspect. So the question is, why did Guatemala decide to do this? So one of the things that they did is they realized that there's a government decision already in place from 1999 that you see there, and it was never really, it was passed into national law, but it was never really expressly used, let's say. So they said, we've had this regulation out since 99. Nobody's really following it. We're kind of confused about, if it applies here or it doesn't apply there. So they put this technical standard out to establish the requirements to follow on to that Article 35 of the government decision from 1999. Another thing they do is they have, in Central America, they have this Central American Technical Regulations. That's a group of countries. For example, in South America, you may know we have Mercosur, which is a trade bloc of countries. We have the Andean Community, which is a different trade bloc of countries. In Central America, they have a group that puts together these Central American Technical Regulations. So they apply to all of the member states who are part of that bloc in Central America. And they had already had technical legislations on labeling of pesticides for domestic and personal use, but they didn't include repellents in that particular Central American regulation. So Guatemala said, you know what, here's another reason we want to put that in place, is because there really isn't one that speaks directly to repellents for use on humans. So we want to make sure we have that in our national law. And then finally, there was this feeling in Guatemala that, we don't really know, again, going back to that government decision, we don't really know how to classify repellents. Who's involved in those. For example, in the United States, depending, you could have the Food and Drug Administration. If it's a spray-on repellent, they could, or at least assert that they have jurisdiction. You could have the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, also saying that they have, or they think they have jurisdiction because it's a repellent product. It may kill the insects, it may repel them, whatever it might do. So what they're saying here is, we're telling you, world, that in Guatemala, we consider these repellents to be pesticides. There's no more confusion about what is it not. These pesticides in Guatemala are considered repellents. Or pesticides, I'm sorry. So if we look at it, and we look at Technical Standard 84-2021, it talks specifically about what types of products it applies to. Here they use the phrase put up in forms or packaging for retail sale, which is essentially for consumer goods. You would find it in a store in Guatemala for retail sale, or as preparations, or as articles. And that's one of the things we don't normally see when we talk about repellents generally, at least in the United States and in Middle East and in Europe to some degree. We don't see articles being regulated, generally speaking. We see them as exempted. You have a treated article that can be exempt, or you can have, when something is an article, it's not subject to regulation. But here, not only do you have what's available for retail sale or preparation, but you have articles regulated as well through this technical standard. And you see some of the examples here, a band with sulfur on it you might put on your wrist, for example. wicks and candles, citronella oil. A lot of places tend to have candles that are made out of citronella. You light them. Those are repellents. Those would be regulated and required to be registered under this technical standard. Fly papers, those are something that I still can't quite understand why they've decided to apply this regulation, this technical standard, to fly papers. I mean, fly papers are essentially a piece of paper, a material with some adhesive on it that when the fly or the insect or whatever it is comes into contact with it, it gets stuck and eventually will die on that paper. I don't understand why that needs registration. I mean, in the United States, it doesn't, but that's what the technical standard says. So again, beware that there are these unique things in Guatemala have to pay attention to. And then just giving you a quick overview here, you see these are the types of products that are covered. So pretty much everything that you would think of as possibly as a pesticide for these uses in Guatemala, these 6 are covered. These 6 categories are covered. Final day for comments was the beginning of September right now. So now they're taking all the comments, the authorities, putting them together, figure out if they're going to amend the resolution, keep the resolution, what they're going to do. There's no date yet for a final notice publication, and I wouldn't expect it before the end of this year, given the number of comments they received. But as we get information on that, we'll bring it to you. So not in force right now, but this is what, if it goes into force, it will look like most likely. Brazil, as I said, has had quite a few changes, certainly in the second half of this year and also a little bit in the beginning as well. What they've done is when it comes to fertilizer products, Brazil, the Ministry of Labor, got together with the fertilizer manufacturers in Brazil, and they published what's called in English a quasi-GHS manual. And quasi in English, British English or American English, means it's like something, but it's not exactly the same. So they published a quasi-GHS manual. So it's a manual for use in fertilizer products that's like GHS, but it's not strictly applying GHS to fertilizers. There are a lot of things that are similar or the same in it, but it's not GHS. Make sure you understand that. They're not taking GHS and applying it to fertilizers. They're taking something, creating a manual that's like GHS and applying it to fertilizers. You see the Ministry of Labor is involved here. And the reason that they did this quasi-manual is because the Ministry of Labor has decided they want to communicate even more safety and health information to workers, so they have more information than maybe they did in the past. And also they want to have a sustainable environment. So how can these fertilizer products help contribute to a sustainable environment? And this started, as you see there, from an information gathering project. They started talking with these manufacturers, getting information from them. And they said, what we want to do in this guidance, in this quasi-GHS manual, is to communicate the hazards of fertilizer substances to end users, so the people who will actually be applying them on the fields, on the plants, whatever it might be, actually give them information about the hazards, and also how to make sure that they're classified accurately, certainly, and how they're classified in a consistent manner. So you don't have 3 types of the same fertilizer being classified potentially 3 different ways and having 3 different types of hazards that are communicated or not communicated. They want to try to streamline that and make it as clear as possible and as consistent as possible. And again, as we said here, the GHS system was used as a basis for this project, but I know I keep saying it, but I want you to understand it is not putting GHS on fertilizer. It is doing a lot of the things GHS does, but specific to and centered around fertilizer. And they use the 7th revision because that's what GHS will be using in Brazil at the next revision date. So what they did when they were preparing the manual and they were having that dialogue with industry, what the labor group did is they looked at 3 specific external sources. And some of you may see them, may be familiar with them here, ECHA in Europe and the eChem portal for OECD and so on. And they looked at these and they said, okay, what information is out there that we can help bring to the manual to make it safer for workers and also safer and more consistent for people who are applying them. And here's some databases that they pulled from. You see what the database gives you as well, where they got the information they have. So manual's broken down. You see it's in 4 sections, and this is what each section does. You can read it at your leisure. I'm not going to go into it. I said earlier that it is a quasi-GHS manual, so it's not GHS exactly, but you see in the list here, Appendix 2 provides the GHS classification for macronutrients. So in this particular case, in Appendix 2, The macronutrients are classified according to the 7th revision of GHS. However, the rest of it is not. This particular appendix, GHS 7th revision of the Purple Book, applies, but not elsewhere. And there are links in here. You can get the versions of the manual either in English or in Portuguese. In Brazil, another one, we have quite a few ones. Carbendazim is having not a resurgence, but it's getting a lot of attention, kind of like PFAS has in Europe and the United States, certainly in the last year or two. It's getting a lot of attention in Brazil. And a draft resolution was issued in June. It came into force about a month ago, a month and a half ago, something like that. And it's now called RDC number 739. If you're not familiar with not just Brazil, but regulations in South America, the draft resolution has a number, 1099, but then once it's passed into law, since it's no longer a draft, they don't call it resolution 1099. They call it resolution number, and then whatever the next number in the order is. So here it's RDC number 739. They're the same in terms of their overall content, or they're similar in their overall content, but they're not exactly the same. One was a draft, one is now final law. And essentially, it would ban that active ingredient in pesticide products in the country. So now, as of August 9th of 2022, that active ingredient is banned in pesticide products in Brazil. I've had clients say, is it banned in here? Is it banned there? Brazil is one of the ones that has stepped up and formally taken a stand and said it is actually on a banned list in our country. Other countries are looking at it saying, maybe we will, maybe we won't. This case, it's actually banned in Brazil. And if you say, excuse me, if you say, well, what do you mean by banned? Is it banned everywhere? Is it banned in certain circumstances? Look at Article 1 right here. This resolution applies to all technical and formulated products based on the active ingredient currently registered. So if you have it currently, that active ingredient currently registered in a formulation in Brazil, you have to substitute it or pull it off the market, or applying for registration in Brazil. So if you're going through the Brazilian application process now for a pesticide that has that active ingredient in it, you don't have to. You should pull your registration, would be our recommendation, because the authority is going to reject it anyway. So there's no point in spending time and money to move through the process when based on this resolution, you're not going to be approved in the country. So again, we would recommend you pull the registration. You don't have to, but we would recommend just to make it easier for you. And also some of the changes to the monograph of the active ingredient. Article 2 of the regulation talks about there are 6 specific changes, and we won't go into them specifically, but know that if you have that active ingredient anywhere, there's changes to the monograph. Make sure you're aware of that because it's not the same as it has been prior to August 9th of this year. Talking a little bit more, and again, I know there's a lot of detail. If you're joining late or you don't remember from the beginning, I said my presentations, they're designed to have a lot of information. So in the future, you can go back and look things up, have the references easy to hand, know where to get more information. I don't cover everything, and this is an example of that. And it says here, for example, Article 4 talks about this ban. And again, it's not just Brazilian manufacturers, it's import, production, marketing, use, technical products, formulated products based on that active ingredient. That covers the scope of the entire regulation. It will be carried out graduously and continuously. So it's, again, it's been banned, but now they're working through all the ones that are on the market saying, okay, let's figure out how we're going to phase out. Can you sell the stock you have in the marketplace, whatever it might be? And with the following items prohibited. So you see here some information. If you have certain products, these things additionally are specifically prohibited. And if you go down to, Article 4, Part 3, production of formulated products from 3 months is the effective rate of resolution. So you have to clear your shelves, clear the market within 3 months of August 9th, which is November 9th, if I'm doing the math correctly. Anything that is in process of being manufactured, you have a 6-month sell-through date. So if it's in process now and you're getting it batched and ready to be sold and put in containers and so on, that particular aspect has 6 months. The other part is stuff that's already on the market, that 3-month period. And then the export of technical and formulated products from 12 months of that August 9th date. So not only does Brazil say it's prohibited in the country, you can't, and I guess it makes sense when you think about it, you can't export products out of Brazil that contain that active ingredient. And when I first read this doing the presentation, I said, well, I don't know if that makes a lot of sense to me. You know, what does it matter where you export it to? But then it said, of course, if you can't produce it in Brazil because it's a banned active ingredient, you can't make pesticides for export that contain it. So yes, that makes total sense. But again, you have 3 different dates there, and I want to make sure you are aware of them. And some other information I won't go into in the interest of time, you can read later. Third one in Brazil, Anvisa is the Brazilian National Health Agency. Health Surveillance Agency is the actual name that they call it. You can see there. Brazil, that's generally speaking, when you're talking about sanitizing products, disinfecting products, things like that, that's where you're going to go for questions or to have your products regulated. They published a draft resolution in April of this year, and it entered into force in May of this year. And it talks about giving you this opportunity to update how can I put this? Update the information and the registration of sanitizing products. And again, that just means in South America, products that have what we call kill claims elsewhere, disinfecting, sanitizing, kills, things of that nature, have aspects that have a lower potential risk provided these things happen. So you have ways that you can have reduced regulatory requirements under this for sanitizing products, provided, one, that they're produced within the scope of Mercosur. So Mercosur are the countries of South America. I think there's, don't quote me, I think there's 4 or 5 off the top of my head that belong to Mercosur. So it has to be produced within a Mercosur country and specifically has to be included on this Mercosur regulation from 2006, technical regulation on criteria, blah, 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 blah. So you have to produce it in a Mercosur country, and it already has to follow Mercosur regulation number 51 of 2006. If it meets those 2 criteria, you can potentially get a lower risk or an exemption of lower risk for your sanitizing product. You see here, provided they comply with RDC 650, which again is this regulation, they would receive less regulatory scrutiny by Anvisa, the sanitary authority, and a potentially faster path to market. That's how the regulation is written, and that's why I made it stand out in red type. Potentially faster path to market. They're not promising you an expedited review period. They're simply saying, well, if you have less things that the regulators want to look at or need to look at, it could potentially reduce your time to market. But I've had clients say, oh, that means I get to market faster. And I say, well, not necessarily. Maybe you will, but the authority is not promising that that will happen. So again, it's just a small detail maybe, but make sure you're aware about that. And then, excuse me, RDC 650, you see here the categories of products that it applies to. So if you say, well, are any of my products subject to this for this potentially less scrutiny regulation relief? You see here products for general cleaning, inanimate surfaces, environments, homes, industries, public or private places. And those are specifically listed in Annex 1 of the resolution. But generally speaking, when you read that, it's pretty much everything. Industrial, private, environments, homes. It seems to be everything except maybe hospitals. And I don't know if you go to that appendix, if hospitals are included or not specifically. Maybe that's considered to be a public or private place, and that's included as well. But generally, anybody is eligible for this as long as you meet the 2 criteria we talked about earlier. Okay. Just a little bit more on there. In order to meet the criteria, you have to have certain aspects. So again, it has to be made in a Mercosur country, and it has to comply with the Mercosur regulation we talked about from 2006, and it has to be in one of those categories we just looked at. Now they put some also conditions on it. They say, well, here are the things. For example, products formulated with substances that have no demonstrable mutagenic, teratogenic, or carcinogenic effects. So it doesn't cause cancer, doesn't cause mutations, doesn't cause birth defects. I would think that would be intuitive to most companies that we have a product, if it's a carcinogen, if it's carcinogenic, we can't get a reduced regulatory review of our product. It doesn't make sense, but I guess Anvisa felt the need to specifically say that. So it tells you, for example, if you meet those criteria on the other slide, but then you don't meet criteria here, then you can't go through with the process. So again, just kind of maybe saying things that don't necessarily need to be said, but they are. pH value, that's something you wouldn't necessarily think of. If you have a pH, greater than 2 and less than 11.5, you can apply in certain cases. Other cases, depending on where your pH is, you may not be able to, or you won't be able to. And then there's some that have exclusions. You see here, Article 4 and 5. If you look at the regulation, those that have antimicrobial action, and others that have certain mechanisms of action. So oxidation, for example, those are specifically excluded from the regulation. So again, I'm trying to make it as clear as possible, and I know from having read the regulations that's difficult. There are so many exclusions that we saw on the first slide, and then this slide as well. You have all those exclusions, and then you got to look at this, and you got to look at that, and you got to look over here, and it's a good idea. It's very complicated. I'll be the first one to admit that. But I think if your products meet these criteria, it's definitely worth pursuing to hopefully, again, get that reduced risk assessment and get it to market hopefully faster than you would. Then the sanitizing products, we talked about Appendix 1 before. What does it include? These are the types of products that are included in this RDC, in this regulation. So again, pretty much see things you see all the time. Specifically, be aware, air fresheners without bacteriostatic action. So air fresheners that just fragrance the air or scent the air don't actually improve the scent of the air by killing insect, or it wouldn't be insects, it would be bugs or microbes or so on. So make sure you're paying attention there. Wipes for windows, general purpose cleaners. I mean, very broad information there, but these are the categories that could be subject to the regulation. And then Argentina, moving on from Brazil, going to Argentina. This I put in place only because it has been talked about. It's been in the National Gazette, but there is no specific aspect that complies with chemical regulations as yet. And you'll see why I say that in a second, and the reason I wanted to share it. So the Argentine agency has announced they have a draft bill in place that would replace and update their current data protection law. The current data protection law, as you see here, is from 2000, so 22 years old. A lot of technology has changed. A lot of things have happened. They want to update that data protection law. And the draft is designed to protect this is why it's particularly important, protect the privacy of personal data. So just focus on that, and then give individuals access to information that's public and so on. Protect the privacy of personal data. And it's very similar to the EU model about data privacy. The question now becomes, and Company Trade Association in Argentina, the Chemical Trade Association, has asked the group, will it apply to chemical substances and notifications that you make to the authority for registration in Argentina? And because there it specifically, again, it talks about personal data. They said, well, okay, what does that mean? Does that mean if I'm signing an application for registration, will it protect people from knowing that I signed the application? And what is personal data? If I am the head of a company and I make a registration, is that considered personal data because I'm the owner of the company? A lot of questions have been asked. And what has actually been said is by the group in Argentina, we hadn't thought about that. We don't know. So they're not saying it's not going to affect companies and data privacy and so on when they make submissions, but they haven't said it will either. That's why I want to call your attention to it. They said, we weren't aware of that. We didn't think about that. We're going to sit down and have a conversation with industry and so on about it. And maybe it will apply and maybe it won't apply, but they just don't know yet. Public meetings are being held right now. You see there in September of this month. So I would certainly say if you want to get your comments in now, certainly do that. Again, it's kind of unclear, but I wanted to make you aware of it because there's the possibility it could go to data protection when it comes to, again, registrations or notifications or dossiers. Okay. Colombia, this is something that we've had webinars on in the past. Their Decree 57 we've talked about, where registration of chemical products in Chile, they have a national inventory and so on. And one of the things that they said, and you go back and look at that webinar on the YouTube channel, one of the things that they said at the time was, we, the Colombian authority, are going to develop a means to do electronic submissions for this notification process. And they said there's no paper allowed, no anything. It has to be an electronic submission. But the joke was, if you want to call it a joke, when it came out, there was no mechanism in place to make these submissions. They published the law. It was final. It was incorporated into national law. And it said you must do these notifications by these days, but there was no way to do it, no electronic means in place. Well, they fixed that, and now they've said, okay, we have the regulation, we have the mechanism in place for making these electronic submissions. And if you don't know, it's on here. The reason that Colombia did this, I don't want to say the only reason, because I'm sure there were other reasons as well. But one of the reasons that Colombia did this is because in the middle of 2018, the OECD came out and published this document you see here, which basically said any country that is an OECD member that has not talked about implementing GHS or implemented GHS, you are required to do so. So that's certainly a reason that Colombia and the other country who hadn't done it at the time was Israel. Israel has done GHS, and coincidentally, they've also done a chemical notification scheme. So that's one of the reasons, certainly, those two countries implemented GHS was because they were required to as part of being an OECD member. And then you see the degree applies to the usual suspects, your manufacturers, your importers, transporters, users. Again, things like we see pretty much in other countries that have chemical substance regulations. There are exempt substances, and there's actually quite a bit that are exempt, and they're very similar to how other national chemical regulations are written around the world. So, for example, naturally occurring substances. If you have a naturally occurring substance, generally speaking, elsewhere in the world, that's going to be exempt from notification, and that's the case here in Colombia as well. Articles, again, we talked about that earlier. Articles are generally exempt, at least in the US and the EU and other markets. Same thing in Colombia, you're not going to have to do that. So this is kind of just a refresher on what that registration or the regulation relating to chemical substances was about. And now as you move, you see, okay, now let's talk about that actual notification process and what needs to go into that notification process. Because again, it can only be an electronic submission. You cannot do a paper dossier in Colombia. So your threshold is more than 100 kilograms of a substance. And you see some of the things here that you need to provide as part of that electronic submission. This is not everything. Don't get excited and say, oh, I only need 5 things. That's not the case. But you see these are required. And then as of May 31st of this year, they published the Circular 018, which has the instructions and how to access the software to make those submissions. I put that as a hyperlink. The hyperlink will work in the PDF you received this morning. So you can go in and do that, and that will take you exactly to the website to register and so on. Andrea, that's a good question. I haven't looked at that recently, but what I would suggest is go to the webinar that I did, and that will have the dates in it. I don't remember off the top of my head because I haven't looked at it probably since I did that webinar. It's not this year, and I want to say it's the middle of next year. But again, go look at that presentation, and if you can't find it there, send me an email because I haven't looked at the deadlines in a while. But that information is certainly out there. And then wrapping up with Trinidad and Tobago, again, just because they put the standard out there and I wanted to make sure everybody had information about it. They've addressed what they call general purpose cleaning and disinfecting products. So back in July of this year, their Bureau of Standards, and again, remember we talked about when we started with Argentina and their technical standards, we said that a lot of countries don't have the expertise to do what they want to do. They don't have those people in their government ministries. So they go and send it to a third party and then take what the third party does and put it in national law. That's, again, here what Trinidad and Tobago did is they used the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards to create this draft. And it has a funny description there when you look at it. It has the abbreviation for the group in Trinidad that's going to administer the PCTTCS. And then number 21 of 20, and then you see 2 X marks. That's because in Trinidad right now, as you see, it's a draft standard. So they don't know when it's going to be released. So they left the date off. They wouldn't say, 21:2022 because they don't know that the regulation is going to be released in 2022. So that's just a placeholder for the actual date when it goes forward. And then the actual title is the General Purpose Cleaning and Disinfecting Requirements, compulsory requirements. So it is mandatory. And what it does in Trinidad and Tobago is it establishes specific chemical requirements and labeling requirements for what are called, as you see here, general purpose cleaning and disinfecting products for household purposes. So it's a lot of words. You say, well, am I subject to this if I mark it there? If you have a general purpose cleaning and disinfecting product, so for a household, so hard surface cleaners, toilet cleaners, restroom or bathroom cleaners, things like that, Those are general purpose cleaning and disinfecting products used in a household. Those types of products would be subject to the standard if it actually passes international law. And also for automotive applications. So I put that there to say, well, you're thinking, okay, well, I don't have a household purpose for my product, but I do use it, for example, to clean the seats in my automobile. That automotive application is actually considered to be under this general purpose cleaning and disinfecting products. It's not necessarily what we would think of. We would say, just cleaning, disinfecting, it's for the home use. Here they say it's home use, but also for automobiles. So again, just pointing out things you might not know otherwise if you just read this very quickly. Also including dilutable products. So if you say my product ships to Trinidad and Tobago as a concentrate, but it's meant to be diluted by the end user, you would be subject to these regulations if they pass international law. As it's written right now, you can't say, well, mine is a concentrate, I ship it as a concentrate, I don't have any obligations. If this passes, you would have an obligation because the intent of your product is to be diluted, which then brings you under the scope of this regulation. Also wipes that we have, disinfecting wipes, cleaning wipes, disinfecting pads, same idea. I don't produce a neat product, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago. I ship wipes that have this material in them. It's not an aerosol or it's not a liquid solution. It's wipes that are already containing this. Would that be applicable? And they specifically say, again, in the regulation, if it passes, yes, cleaning and disinfecting wipes or pads are required to be registered in Trinidad and Tobago if this goes through. And the public comment, we just missed it. The public comment period ended on, Monday, September 12th. So we just missed the end of the comment period. Let's see, Tracy. So if you sell a product to industry that you don't sell to consumers, but it could be sold to consumers, such as a toilet bowl cleaner, is the product we sell only to industry in scope? Again, this is a draft standard, so things can certainly change. But what I would say is at this point, because let's just assume this regulation as it's written goes 100% into force and there are no changes. My advice to you as your consultant would be, well, you can presumably, you can clearly show through your labeling or marketing or whatever it is that your product only goes to I&I, industrial and institutional, not to household consumers. So provided you could do that, I would say you're not subject to it, because if the enforcement agency was to say, well, we think this applies to you, you can say, no, here's my label, here's my marketing, here's my whatever that says it's only for industrial and institutional use. So I would say you would not have an obligation. And if you were pushed, you could very easily show that you don't have an obligation. I think I answered your question. If not, just do a follow-up email or another chat right here. We can go ahead and see. So again, when we're going to talk about the general purposes cleaning and disinfecting products, again here, the regulation applies to this list of products. And this is actually the entire list. It's only 11 items, but as you read through, you see, wow, each line of these has quite a few aspects that are part of it. So for example, they talk about general purpose cleaners, including but not limited to all these aspects. So they're saying if it's a general purpose cleaner, like we saw on the previous slide, it applies, but it's not limited to just these things you see here. So you say, well, I don't have a general purpose cleaner that cleans microwaves, but it cleans toaster ovens or something like that. Well, you're not excluded because it says including but not limited to. So again, think very carefully about what your application is going to be. And again, going back to Tracy's question, if it's marketed at all to consumers, think very carefully if it would be considered general purpose cleaning and disinfecting, because they're basically saying any product, as I read it, could fall under these requirements. Disinfectants, including disinfectants containing quats. I don't know why they chose to say quats are specifically included. I mean, that's a lot of disinfectants globally use quat compounds as part of their mechanism of action. I don't know why they called that out specifically, but they did. So if you have a question about whether quat disinfectants are included, you can see it here. Let's see. Oxidizing or bleaching agents, again, things you might not consider to be regulated if this draft goes through. Includium calcium hypochlorite. So, I mean, again, well, it's not exactly naturally occurring, but it's also not truly synthetic either. That wouldn't be required to be registered. Well, they say actually including calcium hypochlorite would be registered, again, if this goes through as it's written now. Automotive cleaners we looked at. Regulation applies to these list of products. Number 11, sanitizers not designed for human application. So again, they seem to be stating over and over and over that these things are applicable. You see the tire, engine, dashboard, and so on. That's for the automotive parts. But they're also saying, you know, whether it's windows or floors or fabrics or whatever it might be, these things are specifically included if the draft regulation goes forward. So again, I don't know why they seem to keep saying it and saying it and saying it and saying it again, but they choose to for some reason. But I like the fact here that the regulation has these 11 items very specifically listed. And I believe that will take us to the end. Again, not the full hour, but hopefully you got a sense of what was going on in these countries. And then we will have done 4 webinars a year. This is the number 3. One of the things the webinar we're going to be doing in the 9th of November is cosmetic regulations in the Middle East. And that's probably, in addition to my GHS in South America, again, which you can find on the website, on the YouTube link, are the 2 most requested webinars that I've had. And I've done the South America GHS and now cosmetic regulations in the Middle East. And if you're looking at this saying, well, I don't do business there, or I don't do cosmetics there, it's interesting. It's complimentary. I would say I would advise you to just register for it and join us for that, because there are a lot of regulations with cosmetics in Middle East, cosmetic substances that also carry over into the chemical side of the business, especially those that can be used in both applications, you know, chemical manufacturing for something and also chemical manufacturing for cosmetics. So you might think it's not applicable, but I would advise you to think twice maybe in that case. And that's a clickable link. That'll be the 9th of November of 2022. Just give you a second here. If any last minute questions on the chat, so I can certainly answer them. Again, in about 30 minutes, 45 minutes, this webinar with the audio and with the video will be up on our YouTube site. There's no password. There's nothing. You can watch it. I believe you can download it. I'm not positive, but I believe that you could. If you need to share it within your company, please feel free to do that. All right, so we don't have any questions there. So thank you very much. If something comes up later and you think about it, please, my email is at the beginning of the slide. You can please send me an email. I'm happy to answer it, no charge, and give you some background information or answer the questions that you might have. So thank you very much.